Right, I have clicked over until 1930. So I will declare this meeting open and started, and welcome everybody to this first Zoom meeting of this winter session for the Southwestern Wales branch. There's a couple of bits of housekeeping. Firstly, could people remain muted unless you're going to be asking a question at some point? And secondly, most of you will have heard earlier, we are recording this, hopefully to get it put up onto our YouTube page at some point. So if you don't want to be seen on that, please take your picture off now, etc. But other than that, I'll make a start and introduce Roger French, who doesn't really need any introduction, I suspect, to everybody on here. Roger has obviously been a very successful manager within the bus industry. His activities at Brighton and Hove, I'm sure, are known by everybody. The excellence awards that they achieved in that era. And it still rumbles on today because they did come second in the bus awards on Tuesday, which is...
I believe we're first in the city operator category, so yeah, good for them.
So, you know, it's still rumbling on, Your Excellence. But you retired about 10 years ago and have since been touring the country, sampling bus operation, good practice and bad practice. And I'm sure most people on here are, I won't say regular readers of your blog because it's sometimes difficult to keep up with you. But certainly you give a very fascinating insight into many aspects of the industry, bus and rail, and we won't mention the word DRT, at least not to start with. So we had a bit of an exchange about the topic to come and talk to us about, and it evolved into what makes a successful bus operation in 2023. And I would sort of teased you a little while ago about it's the one who can get the most money out the government is the one. So perhaps that's not the best sort of attitude to have with this. So I think I better leave it over to you and open the floor to you, Roger. So welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Michael, for those words of welcome. It's an absolute pleasure and a delight and indeed an honour to be speaking to everyone this evening. And I'm so bowled over that so many of you have given up the evening to listen to my musings about what makes a successful bus operation. So thank you so much for doing that. I'm going to share my screen so that you can see a few pictures that I've done, so you don't have to look at my face all the time. And so let's do that. Let's get that bit out of the way now. And hopefully if I do that and then that, I hope, Michael, can you tell me, can you all see now what makes for a successful bus operation in 2023?
I can see the front page of it, Roger.
Excellent. Yeah, that's jolly good. Okay, well, actually, as I was saying to Michael before he just brought me onto the call, there's not actually a lot different to what makes for a successful bus operation in 2023 as in 2022 or actually in any previous year either. The secrets of running buses successfully have pretty much always been the same throughout time. It's just that the structure around how that service is provided does change over time. And as we all know, back in 1986, there was an absolute fundamental change in how buses were provided, moving over to deregulation, and the industry was pretty much privatized from its old nationalized or municipal arrangement. And I would suggest to you this evening that a similar absolute change is happening to the industry now. But whereas it all happened on a specific date in October 1986 to deregulate, the change now is happening almost insidiously. It's gradually, but there is as fundamental a change going on now as it did all those years ago. And But, and I'll talk about some of that soon, but I just want to emphasize that actually the ingredients of running a successful bus operation haven't changed. Now, what do I mean by success? Let's define that. I would put it that it means that we're growing the number of people traveling, but in a financially sustainable way. Whether that's the person paying their fare or someone paying it on their behalf, whether it's local government through concessionary fares schemes or central government through other various schemes at the moment. But it has to be sustainable. We can't have a situation where we were pre-deregulation of money coming into the industry from public funds and not knowing from one year to another how that was going to be. I always liken it to baking a cake. If you want to make a cake, you've got to put in all the ingredients. If you leave the butter out, if you leave the eggs out, if you leave the flour out, you're not going to get a proper, decent, edible cake. And similarly, it is with the making a successful bus operation. You need the ingredients, all of them, and you need a proper infrastructure in which to run the buses. Just like if you put all the ingredients together to make a cake and you didn't have an oven, you're not going to get a properly baked cake. And the other thing I would say, just as a preamble, is that this isn't child's play, but it's amazing how many people, almost amateurs, think they could run buses better than professionals. It's very much an industry that has historically had a lot of dedicated, passionate people who are professionally trained, know what they're doing about running buses. And that is the best way of running a bus company. As I'll come to, that situation is one of the things that is changing gradually, but definitely at the moment. So let's get on with the ingredients, and then we'll come to the infrastructure. There are 5 key ingredients, and I would emphasize as I go through these, you cannot leave one out. And I also need to say from the outset, because I'm not going to mention it other than now, that reliability is a given. You know, I've lost count of the number of times I see bus companies doing research and they say, do you know what passengers want most of all? They want a reliable service. Well, there's a surprise. Why did you just spend 10 grand on research to tell you something that's absolutely obvious? Have you ever been in a shop, a retailer, to buy a piece of equipment and said and the person has said to you over the counter from 1,000, well, this will be reliable. Well, of course it will be reliable. That's what you want to buy. If you're buying a washing machine, you don't want one that's going to keep breaking down. And so it should be with running a bus company. Let's take it that reliability is a given. Now, here are my 5 ingredients, which I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about each one, and we'll go round in order. So frequency we'll come to. That's the sort of way the timetable is, what it is to attract people. Then we need to get to grips with pricing to make sure it gives value and simplicity and is simple to understand. We come then to regular investment in new buses, and then we've got good frequent services at a good value price in good well-equipped buses that you can travel on. You have to give information about it, you have to properly sell it, and finally, in the middle of it all, you've got to give good, not just good customer service, what I call legendary customer service. So I'm going to go through each one, and we'll start with frequency. And I also say regularity and consistency because it depends, obviously, where we're talking about. But whether it's a city or whether it's a hamlet or increasingly very busy and popular interurban routes, you need to adjust and adapt the frequency according to the market. I'm not saying that everywhere should have a turn up and go service. That would be absolutely ridiculous. There might be a hamlet that only warrants a bus once a week, but it has to be on a regular basis and it has to be consistent. Now, you may wonder why I'm laboring that point. And it is because one of the things that disturbs me as I'm reading more recent times is that some of the larger groups are now getting the hang of and in fact, there was a headline in one of the trade magazines last week, was it, or this week indeed, that one company is now using AI, the buzzword artificial intelligence, to do its scheduling based on historic experience of that journey, of that timetable in the past. Basically, what they're saying is that, and it is true, some of FirstBus's timetables coming out now do this. Instead of having a consistent, say, bus every 10 minutes or every 12 minutes or every 15 minutes, the times will vary, sometimes by a minute, by 2 minutes, by 3 minutes across the day, because an analysis of all the data, because we've got so much data now with technology, shows that that journey can sometimes run a couple of minutes later. So then they're scheduling it to be a couple of minutes later. This, unfortunately, is going to take away the simplicity of being able to let people know a bus leaves at 5 past, quarter past, 25 past, 25 to, 5 to, etc., every hour. We're going to have different times at different hours. So consistency is key. And then, of course, it does depend what the market we're aiming at. And there's a huge difference between the education market, which probably only needs a journey there and back on school days, and the sightseeing and visitor market or leisure market or commuter market. So all these things, there's not one answer to them all. My benchmark is, from my time at Brighton and Hove, that towns and cities with a population of 200,000 and above, you should be able to have 80% of that population enjoying a bus at least every 10 minutes. And I say every 10 minutes as a benchmark for what I define as turn up and go, i.e. leave home, don't worry what the time is, turn up at a bus stop. And if there's a bus every 10 minutes, then you'll wait on average every 5 minutes on average. Some days is your lucky day, you wait a minute. Some days your unlucky day, you'll make 9 or 10 minutes. So on average, you waited 5 minutes. By definition, it has to be that. Now, some bus companies push that 10 minutes on. Let me, was that, oh, I don't know if I can, I can't press. Thank you. If some companies say 12 minutes is good enough for turn up and go. I feel 10 minutes was always a benchmark when I was at Brighton and Hove, because 5 minutes is about the time that I arrive at a bus stop. And after 5 minutes, I start looking at my watch thinking, when is the bus going to come? Is it possible, David or Michael, that you could admit the people when that comes up? Because otherwise I don't know if everyone can see that on my screen. As I'm sharing my screen, I guess they can. So we'll be able to see the latecomers coming, which will be nice. But now with real-time information available, I think you can extend that a bit. Definitely to 12 minutes, whereas historically it's 10 minutes. And for towns and cities with 100,000 population, I think you should be able to have a network where 80% of the people get a bus every 15 minutes. Now, just as an example of the way frequencies have gone over the course of time, I want to take one of my favourite historic routes in Brighton and Hove, and that's the route that goes up the Lewis Road to Falmer, where there's 2 universities, the Brighton University and the Sussex University, and also Brighton University comes down further down the road. And also now there's the Amex Stadium out at Falmer as well. Now, 30 years ago, that service ran half hourly with Leyland Nationals, providing a capacity of 120 an hour, pretty much approximately. With the growth in the universities over the decades of the 1990s and the 2000s, by 2005, we were running double decks every 5 minutes with a growth of 10 times with a capacity of 1,020. Continued growth 7 years later led us to convert the route to bendy buses, former London buses, every 5 minutes, with an additional double deck every 12 minutes. And that brought the capacity to double again to 2,100 an hour. And that still wasn't enough at the beginning of the student terms of the academic year. Quite incredible growth. And once you get into that virtuous circle of getting literally a bus turning up every 3 to 4 minutes, then you will get more growth, because people just realize, like the London Underground, you just turn up and you know you're not going to wait very long, as we all know on lines like the Victoria line for those who go up to London. It also, if you've got strong universities in the city, enables you to run a commercial night network as well. And at times we were running buses literally every 7.5 to 10 minutes right through the night to 3:30 in the morning, and then pretty much half hourly through till about 6 a.m. And then it would start getting going again. But you can't do that if you don't have the density of population, the city network, and the infrastructure of the universities, which are growing. But there are many towns and cities across the UK who are running successful urban networks to the same degree that Brighton and Hove had. And I just give 4 examples there of Nottingham, Reading, Bournemouth and Poole and Oxford. And I choose those deliberately because it's nothing to do with ownership. Some people say, oh, public ownership's the way to go. We must go back to more public ownership. It doesn't matter who physically owns the vehicles. And as we know, Nottingham and Reading are still municipal-owned bus companies. Brighton and Hove and Oxford, part of the Go-Ahead, Bournemouth and Poole and Oxford, part of the Go-Ahead group. It's nothing to do with that. It's about the nature of the market that they are being served. People also say, oh, that London is the epitomizes frequent buses. No, it doesn't actually. It does perhaps in many parts of the capital, but on the fringes there are buses that run. In this case, the Western bus from Bromley North every half hour Monday to Saturday, and every hour on a Sunday. And there are even more infrequent buses. But it goes back in London. But it goes back to making them regular and making them consistent. The interurban market has really also taken off, and we have some excellent examples of some interurban routes, the Oxford Tube being the classic, running as frequently in the peak hour currently of every 10 minutes and every 15 minutes through the day. And there's also, I'm just, sorry, and then, I don't know how, sorry, I don't know if anybody else can see that I've got messages flashing up on my screen, which I'm not able to, I'm going to have to ditch that for a minute and click approve, and then I don't know what that, deny, and then click view, and then play that. Right, sorry. The red arrow between Nottingham and Derby, another hugely successful frequent urban route, and there are many of these around the country. Now, it's interesting that with bus service improvement plans, which are obviously the thing of the moment, local authorities are finding ways to add new services and deliver them in ways that, in Hertfordshire's case, the top 2 examples there, are complementary to the existing frequent network, and particularly interurban network, providing east-west links across Hertfordshire. In Oxfordshire, the 2 examples down below, they've rather gone for a different model of putting in new bus routes to villages and parts of the county that previously haven't had buses for many, many years. And these 2 examples just started, in fact, this week. The one on the right, the 68 started this week, and the one on the left started earlier in this month, which is a 2 or 3 times a week village link to the town of Reading. In Hertfordshire, they're also going for some sort of branding, but it's all a bit confused at the moment. I would like to see that extended, as I'll come to shortly, much more to make it a success, because at the moment, as those of you who've read my blog will know, it's all very confused in Hertfordshire as to what is a Connect Herts bus and what isn't one. Leicester is it's becoming a hugely successful area to develop the bus network, and they have done very, very well in bringing in this free town centre bus called Hove, which I believe is growing extremely well, and it is, as you can see, is very high profile, and again runs very simply every 10 minutes. And in this area that you're representing as part of the Omnibus Society, it's been brought to my attention a similar sort of city free every 10-minute type service is running in Hereford, although I'm not sure it's that frequent, which I haven't yet tried out, but hope to fit in the next week or two. So these things are becoming a thing with BSIPs. And also just to add that tourist areas as well prosper with good frequent links. The Isle of Wight on the top right there, very much so. Southern Vectis bus operator of the year as part of Go South Coast, just gained that title, and very deservedly so. But not every route runs very frequent. They adjust accordingly. So, for example, the 2 might be every half an hour, but the bus up to Cowes every 10 minutes. The 555 through the Lake District, again, it varies in frequency from the winter to the summer. The Yorkshire Dales have some frequent routes, some very infrequent routes. And Cornwall has obviously had a huge boost of public money to try different routes that for many years had very sparse frequencies. And of course, there's then the whole tourist market more generally with open top services, which are highly successful, including bottom left. I would highlight what First Kerner have done across a wide range of Cornwall and Somerset, where they operate these hugely successful routes, particularly the Minehead now onto Ilfracombe route, which for many years had virtually no bus route at all. And now at times it's running up to every hour in the main season, which just goes to show there are still parts of the market that can be exploited. The Bournemouth-Swanage route, Route 50, part of the Breezer network, a hugely successful route, and one of the very few buses that obviously takes a ferry on its way. Another example is the airport market, which bus companies are increasingly exploiting, helped by, in the Heathrow case, money coming from Heathrow Airport, because they're trying to up their environmental credentials, looking for ultimately long-term a third runway. So they're putting a lot of money into bus routes to try and encourage more of their staff and passengers to arrive at the airport by coach. But it isn't always, as I say, frequency, it's regularity. And I just point some successes here that Go Coach Hire in Kent operate what are now quite infrequent routes on interurban corridors that once were frequent, but at least they do it in a consistent way. Over the top right, Arriva in Shrewsbury, the 546, which I'll come to when we talk about DRT in a minute, is that's a regular, consistent bus out to the village of Pulverbatch from Shrewsbury, about to be replaced by, or no, has now been replaced by a DRT. Bottom left is the 2-hourly service that Compass Travel run from Chichester up to Petworth. And it's one of these very successful routes that has a semi-flex option in it, which I'll come to shortly. And finally, I just want to highlight what I think would define as the least frequent bus route in Britain, and that's Tavistock Country Buses, Route 112 from Tavistock to Dawlish, that runs just twice a year, because it's timetabled to run on the 5th Saturday of summer months between June and October. So because there's only 5 Saturdays in June and September, it actually only runs twice a year. But it is regular. It wouldn't be classed as frequent, but is hugely popular. And when I travelled on it, actually the minibus was full. But I just do want to touch on the subject of DRT because it is controversial, and a lot of local authorities are spending a lot of money. I estimate that £100 million has been spent on these DRT trials, with mainly public money, some private money, some Section 106 support money, over the last few years and for the next year or two. And they will pretty much all end in failure because the money is not financially sustainable, one of my criteria I mentioned earlier. However, I mentioned Compass Bus just now, and Wiltshire, in your neck of the woods, guys, on this call locally from the Omnibus Society branch here in the West, those routes, I think, are the way to do it, because you have a timetable which has fixed points in it, and people are able to vary the route on a semi-flex basis where the P's appear by either telephoning or using technology with the app to book a bus to come and serve those villages. And personally, I think that is the way forward for some of these rural areas. Go Coach Hire have tried, and they say it's very successful. And the reason they say that is because it's pretty much like, it's more like a shared taxi in the Sevenoaks area than a DRT bus. But that is another way of skinning the cat, as they say. And finally, before we move away from frequency, regularity and consistency, I just want to mention the community bus sector. This is Cookmere Community Buses, and they run an excellent network throughout parts of East Sussex, completely run by volunteers. And we mustn't underestimate the importance of the community bus sector. They actually are some of the most successful bus companies in the UK. And it is quite incredible that the amount of voluntary input that they have. Okay, let's, having established that some of the most successful bus companies running frequent, good, regular routes, let's move on to price. I'm a great believer in having high-profile pricing. For many years, bus companies hid their prices. It's almost it was like a state secret to find out in advance of travel how much it was going to cost. Whereas generally in retail now, price is everything. I mean, Poundland, their whole business ethos was about everybody knowing what the price was to tempt you into the shop. These are a bit outdated now. You won't get a meal deal for £2, but I picked these slides from an earlier presentation some years ago. But the principle is still there. I think it was in Waitrose earlier today, and it was £5 for a meal deal. But what you do, you package things together to make people buy things. Retailers have done this all the time. Bus companies have been woeful at it. But of course, there has been a revolution, and that has happened over this last year, because to begin with, we had it till March, top left. Then it was extended till June. Then it was extended till November next year, October, and then it was going to become £2.50. And then the latest was, of course, old Rishi told us it was going to be £2 through till 2024. Now, this meets my criteria of being something that's high profile. And there is no doubt it is attracting people to travel by bus, and especially as it has continued beyond 3 months, which was always a ridiculous thing anyway, to do it in the 3 months of the winter. But I have grave reservations about this whole thing, because either it will come to an end one day, and then what on earth is going to happen when people have got used to paying £2? And for example, if you travel between Leeds and Scarborough, your fare is going to go from £2 to something like £15 or £16. We're going to see a terrible, I think, tail off in people traveling and resistance to that sort of increase. But there is a school of thought that says now it's been established, and it will be established for 2 years, we're never going to see it end. This is it now. This is how it will be for the British bus industry, just like no politician would ever dream of taking away concessionary fares for those of retirement age. That is now permanent, just as young people's fares are being moved over to concessions in a number of areas up to age 19, in Scotland up to age 22. They're not going to be able to take that away. And I suspect, similarly, this £2 fare will not be able to be removed. So where does that leave bus companies? Well, I'll answer that question towards the end of the presentation. In my judgment, to give you a flavour, it leaves them in a hugely, hugely precarious position because they are absolutely, completely dependent on government funding. And we have to wonder why it is that some bus companies, very successful bus companies in the form of, for example, Links in North West Norfolk and Delaney in the northern area of north of Peterborough, why haven't they participated? And have they been damaged by not participating? The answer is no. And to the last question, and the answer to the first question is they have absolute confidence in their market, that they believe they can generate people traveling by market pricing rather than an artificially low price, rather than underpricing their product. Which successful companies in the UK underprice their product? None. Because a successful company can't survive if it underprices its product. And this is a real problem for the industry going forward. You might think it's strange me saying that because I come from a bus company now when I worked there that introduced a flat fare across the whole network for £1. And it was actually the most successful thing that we ever did. But it was a commercial decision. We weren't relying on anybody else to subsidize it. It was a commercial risk we took. And we adjusted it and changed it over the course of the next 10 years and moved people, in fact, from paying for their journey paying for their travel by journey to paying for their travel by day or by longer period tickets, getting them to trade up. Down in Cornwall, before the £2 fare came in, they had a massive cut, as you can see there, 20% or 40% off the fares to see what would happen. And I think it's unfortunate that the £2 fare has confused this situation, because there's a lot of public money gone into Cornwall. And I think we are owed, as the public, detailed evidence of what is happening. How has it worked? And yet it's remarkably quiet. We're told, oh yes, there's been some growth, but we're not told how much growth. Is there more growth than you would expect? Less growth than you would expect? And we need to know that, because we need to know the relationship between price and generation of passengers. And then, of course, there's the whole issue of technology. You know, when we brought in the £1 flat fare in Brighton and Hove, it was all about a £1 coin. Now, of course, it's all about plastic. Smart cards are pretty much old hat now. It's all about contactless and tapping in and tapping out. And I think this is a good thing, because one of the things you get when you go to London and use that's Oyster or now contactless in London, it doesn't hurt you when you tap your card, because you don't absolutely know what the price is you're going to pay, what it is. And it's the same that when you if people fill up a car with petrol at a petrol station, when they then come to use their car, they're not actually thinking how much each journey costs. But in the past, bus journeys have very much been paid for by paying the driver. But now, with using tap on and tap off, I think we are going to see a different approach to pricing and how that's looked at. I mentioned young people and concessions. I think that's unfortunate that more and more concessions, when I say concessions, I mean free travel, are being given to young people, because I think they're a good market. And I think they can be attracted to travel at good value fares rather than give the fare away. And the problem is, the older you make the free travel to, the bigger the problem of the transition to when they start paying is going to be. I much prefer the system we had at Brighton and Hove of having a very dirt cheap pocket money type fare up to age 16 or 18, and then transition them over to adult fares over a period of 2, 3, 4 years into their early 20s. That's far better than this sort of cliff edge arrangement. And then, of course, at the other end of the scale, we've got older people. This is, by the way, the only known photograph of our esteemed Prime Minister on a bus, so I thought I would just include it. We have at the other end of the scale the sort of old person's market, where we still have the anomaly, but in Scotland and Wales and Liverpool and London, it's age 60. But in the rest of the UK, it's 66, going up to 67 as the retirement age goes up. And it just doesn't seem equitable and fair to me that we haven't got a national scheme the same applicable all over the country. If we are going to give concessionary fares to older people, then let's do it on a fair national basis. That's all I want to say about price. But it is important. The ingredient is absolutely important. And I'm pleased to see it becoming more important now. Let's get on and talk about buses. You've got to do this regularly. It worries me. Well, let me just say why you've got to do it regularly. Because things move on. There was a time that this was revolutionary. You know, people using a wheelchair can get on a bus. But it's old hat now. But it happened gradually. You couldn't possibly have thrown away your whole fleet and replaced it overnight with low-floor buses. But that's what's happening now with propulsion. We're seeing, this is Inverness, and we're seeing Coventry, and then soon it will be Oxford, becoming, and they all like the press releases, the first UK all-electric bus city. They'll all say that or something or other, the first West Midlands city to be all-electric. But the problem is, if you replace all your vehicles overnight, they're all going to age at the same time, and you won't be able to take advantage of the advances in technology. It's far better, if you can, to replace, if you reckon a double deck's going to last 15 years, a 15th of your fleet every year. So that every year you're bringing in new things, new developments in the way buses are manufactured, new interiors for passengers to enjoy. But I recognise that with these new propulsion, particularly electric and hydrogen, as we see here in Crawley, but also in Aberdeen, Liverpool, and the West Midlands and Belfast, you have to have huge infrastructure going in at the garage as well. And if you're going to do that, then to make it viable, you probably have to do a decent sized number of buses to actually get there to make it work. The problem is, as they found out in Liverpool, there's not enough hydrogen. So they've done well in bringing in, I think it's 10, and they're going to have 20 hydrogen buses. But I believe, some of you may know more than me, that you're only getting 2 or 3 out on the road at any one time, because at the moment they haven't quite cracked the problem of how to get hydrogen into the buses, how to get hydrogen to the depots. So it isn't quite working as they perhaps thought it might. There's also, as I mentioned earlier, the benefit of continually improving the way buses look and feel as an interior for passengers. And this is very important. And I'm delighted that my friend and longtime friend and colleague, Ray Stenning of Best Impressions, who has done so much work here in persuading and in cajoling and encouraging the manufacturers to be responsive to those bus companies that are in the vanguard of saying, no, we're not satisfied with rattles and this, that, and bog standard interiors. We want something that's going to have a wow factor to it. And there are increasingly now examples of people who use bus companies absolutely upping their game with the way interiors are, such that, I travel around a lot by bus, and you get on new buses, and there's no doubt passengers, they express their impressiveness. They are impressed when they get on a bus that it actually looks and feels and is very comfortable to travel on. And contrast that with a couple of examples of DRT routes I travelled on recently, which perhaps coincidentally and ironically have both now failed. This one in North Yorkshire, your bus, and this one in East Leeds Flexibus. I mean, they're almost sort of welfare type interiors, aren't they? They're not the sort of thing that you would get on a nice switched on commercially minded bus operator. They're almost, I mean, those seats were plastic. It's almost as if they're expecting passengers to be incontinent, to be honest with you. That's the impression it gives when you get on the bus. Now, I'm pleased to see that TfL are finally getting a hold of the idea that interiors are important. I mean, this is revolutionary for TfL to have things like USB and next stop, better next stop displays and things, which are all good stuff. But ironically, in the funny way TfL do things, they've got this thing going now on Route 63. And of course, they've got to leave it and evaluate it and research it. And it'll probably be about 2 or 3 years before they decide it's a good thing or not. And meanwhile, they're introducing this new network called Superloop. And none of the buses on those routes are going to have this sort of new interior. It's most odd. But anyway, it's good to see London catching up with the provinces at long last. And then, of course, I just want to say something about bendy buses. Some people are very sold on the idea that these are good as a good image to run a successful bus service with. And there's no doubt this glider service in Belfast and indeed in the West Midlands, they're sold on the idea for their Swift network that's going to come in hopefully next year with similarly Arctic buses. But I can see that they're good for sort of commuter type runs, as they were in London between Waterloo and London Bridge and that sort of thing. But frankly, if you're going on a long journey from one side of Belfast to another, you don't want to be on this sort of vehicle. I personally don't like it. I much prefer a double deck and the comfort of a double deck. But I do accept that there are perhaps niche markets where an Arctic bus is appropriate. But whatever buses you're running, you've got to make sure they're presented in a decent way. And I never cease to be amazed at some bus companies who will be nameless who put vehicles out like that. I mean, my goodness, what does that say about the safety? What image is that creating to your passengers? And as well as the way the bodywork's looked after, I've also got a gripe, particularly at this time of year, about not being able to look out of windows simply because the vehicle isn't kept clean. Now, I was told in this example that, well, it gets like that because it goes on the motorway within one journey. It's like that. Well, I'm sorry, I don't buy that. Then you've got to do something about it. You've got to find a way to keep the windows clean, because you can't get passengers on a bus that can't see out a window because of the filth and the dirt. That is not going to get passengers on board. And then another gripe I have is this mishmash of moquettes. And you wouldn't, well, maybe you do, but you wouldn't do this in your living room at home. And what does it say as an image that you create to your passengers? Awful. Just finally on buses, and talking about keeping up with technology, I mean, this is playing the long game, there is no doubt, but it is interesting that both First Bus and Stagecoach are now doing trials of autonomous bus. And those of you who read my blogs will also have seen this road sweeper look like crushed vehicle similarly in Milton Keynes at the moment. There is no doubt in the years to come, when we're all probably dead, there will be autonomous vehicles to some degree in niche markets, as there are already. But I don't ever see it becoming a thing in our lifetimes. Let's move on. Now, when you've got frequent, regular, consistent buses with extra high value, high profile pricing, good regular investment buses, you then got to tell everyone about it. More than that, you've got to sell it. And this is something that the bus companies are woeful at, generally speaking. We can't even get a map out of many bus companies now. They say, oh, it's all online. Well, it hasn't stopped the Ordnance Survey being a very successful publisher of paper maps, or A to Z publishing road atlases. it's all online. Everybody's got Google Maps these days, but these companies think there is still a market for print. And similarly, do you know what the 3 of the top 4 magazines for sales in the UK are? There they are. But it's all online. You can find out what's on the television by just going online. And yet, commercial companies find a market in selling, not giving away, selling that information in the form of TV, radio listings, magazines. If you go to a restaurant, it's nice to have a look at something that's called a menu, and you browse it and you have a look at it. And it's all online. Most restaurants have got a website with their menu on, but they know their market and they know people want it. Now, of course, someone may point out that Wetherspoons, actually, you can all look online and you can have an app and you can order your food on the app and you don't need a printed menu at all. Well, they produce printed menus. They don't say we're not going to produce printed menus because there is a market for printed menus. But I'm afraid there are too many bus companies still saying we're not going to go into printed information. Now, as you know, probably when I was at Brighton and Hove, right from deregulation, right up to the time I retired, for 30 odd years, we produced twice a year a comprehensive bus timetable. And it was well regarded. Everyone looked forward to it. We gave away thousands on the buses. We had outlets all over the city giving them away as well. It was hugely successful. I'm delighted that other companies, not all A4 size, obviously, some do slimline versions, it varies, but I'm delighted some companies do that. And absolutely in Cornwall now, they do this comprehensive timetable with all the operators in it. And it's got 1 or 2 foibles, but it's a good publication. And there's some excellent examples out there of people, of bus companies producing literature that is attractive, that makes you want to pick it up and makes you think that, yes, I will have a look and see what this bus company is all about. And there's just 3 examples: Trent Barton, Reading Buses, and Nottingham City Transport. And then I give you, Transport for Greater Manchester. Do you know, I've seen more exciting orders of service at funerals than what Transport for Greater Manchester try and sell us in terms of using the term. I mean, just look at the difference. Those pieces of information are not going to sell. They're not going to inspire people to travel by bus. They're just literally information providers. Southern Vectis are just one of a number of bus companies who actually not only produce a map, but shout about it all over the place, on walls and in travel offices and on outside walls in bus stations. Others put leaflets available. This is Whippet on their buses. So it's not hard to do. It's just pretty obvious basic stuff here. This at one time revolutionized bus travel in Brighton and Hove. I used to say to people when I made presentations when I was still working, real-time information is, as they used to say, the greatest thing since sliced bread. Now they say it's the greatest thing since real-time information in Brighton and Hove, because it actually made people confident of waiting for a bus. But of course, things have moved on in leaps and bounds, and now you can get it on your phone. But I'm amazed at how few bus companies really promote this. The number of times I've been at a bus stop and I've looked either on the company's website or I've looked at the various apps you can get, the Bus Times app, and I've seen exactly where the bus is, watched it coming, and I've told people waiting with me, the bus is going to be here in 4 or 5 minutes. And they're amazed. They say, how do you know that? And I say, well, you do this. And I don't think bus companies shout about this enough as they should do. The whole area of branding and getting across to people exciting things about what they're doing. I mean, Reading do this admirably with their different colours for their main routes. I love what they do. London are giving it a try with their new buses, but just compare the difference. compare the difference for a while. I mean, it's just they haven't been exciting in it, and look at all those. I mean, they have improved with the latest versions of Superloop, but look at all the little dots on the thing. They're not on the map, the diagram. They're not labelled enough, really. But still, good for TfL that they're having a go. One of the most successful things that we did to promote buses in Brighton and Hove was our I'm on the Bus campaign. I'm very proud of this because we did it in conjunction with Ray Stenning, and it was the most successful thing that we ever did to raise the profile of travelling by bus in the city. At one point, half the fleet had one person. They were all different. Everybody was different. They were all genuine people saying why they travel by bus. Why are they on the bus? There is nothing better than an independent endorsement from your customers saying, yep, they're good because I travel on them. This is why. And we did, as I say, over 100. And everyone clamored to be one of these people and wanted to get on the bus because they loved it. It really captured the imagination. And what it does, it makes people in the community realize that traveling by bus is an everyday, normal thing to do. It's high profile stuff. It's risky stuff because problems, people will say, oh, well, you know, she's on because of that. But then it can be a problem. We had some problems with a window being smashed. The head suddenly falls off. There's no head anymore, so you behead one of the people. But it was a delightful thing to do. And then we extended it to the staff as well, to make the staff be part of the campaign and part of making buses part of the community, which is what it's about. And it was so successful, they even persuaded me to have a go as well, to say that, yeah, I'm proud to be running the buses in this city, and I don't mind telling you all, and here I am. And as I say, I was really pleased that we did this. And then we used the backs as well there was never any commercial advertising on a Brighton and Hove bus in my time. It was all about promoting the bus and having a little bit of a knock at car drivers, because after all, motorists get it pretty much all their way, and in terms of media coverage, and sometimes you have to knock them a bit. Another thing that we did was have this simple thing of naming all our buses so that they're part of the community. And we even brought out a book. This was the cover of the book explaining a lot of them. And a lot of that's Roger Bamber, who was the photographer who sadly passed away. You had to be dead to get a name on a bus, and it captured the imagination again. And Roger did, it was a renowned and award-winning photographer, and he did a lot of photographs for us for bus times, and that's his widow there, proudly looking at his name. And I don't think there are many bus companies that have featured on Pointless as a category in Pointless, and it just shows the level to which you could raise the profile of buses. Now, time's running out for me, but I just want to finish my fifth ingredient, and that is it's all about customer service. It really is. I can't emphasize this enough, and particularly in an age where the amount of the customer service you get from many companies is appalling, absolutely appalling. Try ringing up some companies, try finding a phone number, try emailing, try finding out what the email address is. You might have a form to fill in on an online form, and that's about as good as it gets. Now, of course, the most important ambassador for customer service is the driver. Now, the bus industry does remarkably well for this. Indeed, Transport Focus, with its independent surveys, they mention that aside from punctuality, the driver is the key driver force for customer satisfaction. And the scores that we get as an industry, between 81 and 93%, are actually very, very good indeed. But it isn't just the driver. It's also about having a presence in the town or city and making people able to come and see you and have a physical presence. And again, it's sad to see so many companies closing their travel shops. I was very proud of the fact that we had a shop in Brighton Station for a while, and which sold and gave information out about bus tickets as well as rail tickets. We also had it for a while, going back many years now, a mobile shop as well. But obviously things do change. And I recognize now that a lot of, with things being online and people using cards and smart cards and phones, you don't need to sell tickets so much as you once did. But I just want to leave you with customer service with a praise for Trent Barton, because they make it so clear on their website how you can get in touch with them, which so many companies hide away. And I love that point at the bottom there. We love a good natter. I mean, it's just a lovely way of saying it, isn't it? You know, give us a ring and we'd love to talk to you. And you'll be talking to a human being. It won't be a robot or an AI type thing. And they even put their postal address in there, which very few people actually do these days. I just want to mention about the media when it comes to customer service. We were very high profile in Brighton and Hove because of all the things I've been telling you, the ingredients I've been explaining. And therefore, you can't escape the media, and you're going to get good news and you're going to get bad news, because that's the nature of running buses. But what you've got to do is be up there and out front and front it with your personality, and always have your name and your quote in the article, so that you are Mr. or Mrs. Bus for the city that's there. Right, that's all I want to tell you about the 5 ingredients. If you do all of that, then that's going to be the right ingredients for your cake. But you've then got to bake it. And as I said, you've got to have the infrastructure. You've got to have an oven. You've got to have the right temperature of that oven. Everything's got to be there. Now, there are 5 ingredients that go to what I call the infrastructure. And I'll zip through these, but that isn't to downplay them. They are just as important as the 5 ingredients I've just been mentioning. But these are the responsibilities, as you will have gathered, of the local authority. Roadside furniture is so important. This is the shop window of the bus operation, and local authorities tend to control bus infrastructure along the roadside. And here's a good example in Gravesend, and here's a bad example in Skelmersdale, a poor example in Southgate, North London. I mean, you wouldn't really feel invited to sit and wait for a bus in on that bus stop in, I'm just trying to remember, there was in Runcorn, that's right. This is my worst bus shelter of the year nomination for this year. I found in St Neots, but I was pleased that someone had punched a hole, as you can see there, so you can actually see when the bus is coming. And there was a timetable there when I last went in September, but it was dated for a weekend in June, but it was pretty useless. For a long while, local authorities had a penchant for these totem pole things, but they were absolutely useless, because what local authorities were good at for a while is getting money for capital investments. So they had enough money to put one of these things in, but they don't have enough money to maintain them. So if they're just useless within a matter of weeks, you know, no, they're just absolutely useless. Well, welcome to Runcorn. Oh, and talking of Runcorn, which we'll come to, they were at the vanguard of bus lanes for a while, but I'll come to those in a sec though. But Brighton and Hove obviously did well with what we were doing with a local authority that realised the importance of bus priority. But you get bus priority all over the place now. Sad to say we lost the M4 bus lane coming into London when John Prescott took it away. But here's in Bristol, this is the only known no entry sign except local buses on a motorway, the M32 coming out of Bristol as part of the Metrobus project. This is my favourite bus lane. It's coming in from Newhaven into Brighton on the A259. It was put in by East Sussex and Brighton and Hove City Council working together many years ago now. And the success of it is, as it says there, 45% of the people travel on 2% of the vehicles. And I believe it's now over half. Over half the people on that road travel in less than, there's about probably 2 to 3% of the vehicles. I actually went out and counted one morning in the morning peak the number of people in the number of vehicles, and that's how I got to the figure that I said. And that demonstrates the importance of bus priority measures. But of course, you've got to enforce them. And I'm pleased to say Brighton and Hove were really excellent at camera enforcement. They were in the vanguard of introducing it and make a lot of money. In fact, they fund all their concessionary fares from bus lane and parking enforcement. I said I'd come back to Runcorn because they were one of the first towns that brought in not only just bus priority, but a busway. But it's a classic example of you've got money to install this thing, but you've got to keep it up to date. And it's just now awful if you go to the bus stops around the place. I mean, it's not inviting you to travel, is it? Parking policies are absolutely critical, as is absolutely enforcement. Both the pricing of parking, the availability of parking, and the enforcement of on-street parking is absolutely essential to get the local authority on board and to properly bring in, as well as a park and ride option, something Brighton and Hove never managed to do because of the topography and the geography and the way the South Downs and the sea hemmed in the city. It needed park and ride, but didn't. But any town and city worth its salt should really be keeping vehicles out onto the outskirts of it, as they do in, for example, High Wycombe at the coachway here. Control of roadworks is pretty obvious. I mean, it's just one of the worst. There's only one thing worse than three-way control when you're on a bus and you've just missed the green light and it goes to red and you see three-way control in front of you, and that's four-way control. You think, oh my God, how long are we going to be waiting here? And even worse than that is if the whole road is closed itself. There's so much I could do a whole presentation about roadworks and the need for local authorities to get serious about controlling it. But sad to say tonight, there's no time for that. And finally, the fifth ingredient is you have to have proper land use policies that reflect the fact that you want your city to have a successful bus service. Here's an example in Gwent. This is a headline from a newspaper I picked up to a new Grange hospital. The bus connections were being criticised. And when I looked into it, not surprisingly, because they located this wonderful new hospital right on the edge of the town, which of course is useless in terms of running sustainable bus services too. If you go back to my first point about running frequent, regular services, you'll never be able to do it. They're not going to be financially viable to go all the way out to the edge of the city, linking every part of the city. Far better to have something like a hospital in where that Cumbrian centre is, near the railway station. And of course, out of town retailers, retail parks, which are beloved of certain urban planners, are just hopeless in terms of getting people there by public transport, as are commercial developments on the edge of cities, as are residential areas on the edge of cities. This is Bicester, which Transport for New Homes, an excellent charity, is trying to highlight that some of these things are absolutely made for motorists and cars. I just point you to Abbey Barn Park here in High Wycombe, under construction at the moment. There it is, it's just there. And there's no way you can run a viable bus service to that housing estate. At the moment, it's being served by DRT, not very effectively. I had to wait 40 minutes for my bus back when I went to visit it to see what it was like. So, bringing all this together, those are the 5 ingredients that you need in terms of infrastructure. Now, who is best equipped to make our cake, and who is best equipped to be our infrastructure overseer? Well, they're leading questions, obviously, but there is a school of thought that says, well, the same people. And I would put it to you that they're completely different disciplines. The type of people you need to bake your cake, to make the cake ingredients put together, they have to be creative people, people who are innovative, people who are fleet of foot, people who are in touch and want to relate to people, customers, that sort of thing. People who are commercially minded bus operators. And the people who you want to be overseeing the infrastructure owned that are public assets are people who are more cautious, who are able to look at things in the round, be able to manage public infrastructure, know how to get themselves elected, stand as local politicians, And it's a completely different discipline to be running public assets as it is to be running commercially minded, retail focused bus operations. And that's why, of course, the buzzword for many years has all been about partnership. You work together. You bring your strength of a commercial mind together with those who manage public assets. Now, what, of course, is the role of government in all of this? Well, I raise it now because it's become particularly pertinent to 2023, which is what Michael asked me to talk about, because if I'd given this presentation 10 years ago, I perhaps wouldn't have gone to here. But because we're post-pandemic, when we were absolutely, totally reliant on government for money to survive as an industry, the tail end of that is still very much with us. And the tail end of this, of course, which was an absolute faux pas at the time, to be making out that public transport was dangerous to travel on, which of course it never was. But we're still reaping the negativity of that. In the middle of the pandemic, this thing came out, a strategy for running buses. And to all credit to him, love him or loathe him, the Prime Minister of the day actually did sign it off and say that, you know, he was up for backing buses. Whether he was really serious about it, whether it was one of his jolly japes, one perhaps never knows. But nevertheless, it was the first time ever in my history that a Prime Minister had backed buses. That's all changed in 2.5 years. We've now got, we're going to end the war on motorists. We're going to be friendly. Our Prime Minister is now going to be friendly for motorists to the extent he's brought out a plan for drivers. So we're going to make it easier to park. We're going to stop all this unfair enforcement I've been telling you about that we need. And we're now confused. We're now totally confused because we've still got the money coming through that came from the Johnson area of Bus Back Better, which is the bus service improvement plans. We've got the £2 fare, which Sunak was forced into because of the help for households and the cost of living. But looking to the future, well, where are we going? When the BSIP money runs out, what is actually going to happen? And there's also something internally happening in the industry. Who is in control? Now, I suspect everyone on this call and subsequently watching this on YouTube will be able to name those people. Just in case you can't, and there is someone who doesn't know, it's Sir Brian Souter on the left and it's Sir Maya Lockhead on the right. Those two people absolutely dominated the industry for 10, 20, 30 years. Also, my former bosses at Go Ahead, Chris Moyes, Martin Ballinger and Ian Butcher. Ian Butcher was a finance guy, but Chris Moyes, Martin Ballinger, Brian Souter, and Martin Lockhead, they were career busmen. They knew, but they had buses in their blood. They knew everything about buses. Who are these guys? Anybody know? It's a rhetorical question in a sense. This guy has been chief executive of Go Ahead for just 2 years. He's now handed his notice in and gone. And this guy's taken over from him. Just ahead, it's 2023. We've had a turnover out of 3 of the 5 groups. And in the previous year, 2022, at first, and look at the backgrounds of these people. None of them are career bus people at all. And I am not going to be rude about them, but I would have to say that the likes of Brian Souter and, love him or loathe him, Maya Lockhead and Chris Moyes and Martin Ballinger, they knew everything about buses. They knew what makes buses tick. And I suspect these people don't at all. They're just career industry people who have come to our industry for a period of a couple of years, 2 or 3 years, and then they'll be off to another industry. Whereas these companies are still being run by dedicated, passionate people who know exactly what they're doing. They know all about buses. They're running buses in their blood, as do the people running the companies, particularly on the left, but the municipally owned companies, but also the companies on the right have long been into public transport. So we've got a funny thing happening at the moment where we've got the independent, the small company sector, the municipal sector, and those companies on the right. And then on the other hand, we've got the big groups that are now being run as businesses that are sort of slightly detached from, with chief executives who are slightly detached from, in terms of career experience, the product that they're running. And then to complicate matters further, we've got these guys, Andy Burnham in Manchester, Steve Rotherham, top right in Liverpool City region. Obviously, Sadiq Khan in London's been on this model for some time, and Tracy Brabin in West Yorkshire. They're going to be the people in control of running buses in huge parts of the conurbations in the country. Together with this guy, Oliver Coppard, who's got aspirations. He's the mayor of South Yorkshire. He also has aspirations to take back control of running buses there. Not only that, but in Wales and Scotland, we've got those nations saying that they're committed to bring in franchising of their bus operations and take control. And not only that, but we've got people working in these companies, in consultancies, that are getting more and more influence in how in what is happening in the industry, because people like the combined authorities and the county councils who have had to do their bus service improvement plans, they haven't got anymore, in the main, experienced people in their public transport teams. So they have had to contract out to these people in consultancies to help them write their plans and advise them for the future. And this is part of the reason why, for example, we're seeing these DRT schemes crop up all over the place, because there's money to be made in DRT by people like consultants and by technology companies, as well as bus companies running them on behalf of local authorities. It's all becoming a bit of a money go round. And the problem is there's no hands-on experience of actually running buses by these people. And it does concern me going ahead. And that's why we're seeing bus companies start to look towards franchising as a way out. And why? Because I'll just give you 10 reasons there, which I'll quickly run down. The recovery from COVID is still not 100%. Government are funding the £2 maximum fare. That is limiting revenue growth, because you can get more people travelling at £2, but you're not going to be, as I said earlier, be able to increase that £2. And that impacts the ability to fund increasing costs. So how are you going to afford increased wages for your staff? How are you going to justify increasing costs for diesel or for parts to repair your vehicles if your revenue is being limited by government? The public money through BSIPs is time limited. We're continuing to see challenges in driver recruitment in parts of the country. The cost of new emission-free buses and infrastructure is frightening, absolutely frightening, and I can't see small and medium-sized companies being able to afford it. We've got a change of government likely next year. The trend of online shopping continues. The trend of part-time working at home continues, and we get extreme weather events. Are the risks worth the rewards? I think a lot of bus companies are asking themselves. And if local authorities such as Manchester, Liverpool City region, West Yorkshire, South Yorkshire are saying, yeah, we'll take over running of buses, you can quite perhaps now start to understand why some bus companies are saying, okay, yeah, take it over. Well, that's all very well in terms of the bus companies and the local authorities. Well, where does it leave the passenger? Well, I would just leave you with these 20 thoughts in terms of what is a success. It's not just what I've been saying, but one, is the population growing, static, or reducing? Because that has an impact. What's the population density? Does the road layout of a residential area or the way you serve villages lend itself to bus operation? Is the local economy vibrant? Is there a nighttime economy? Is there a university, college, or further education? Is there a major hospital? Is the town centre retail offer impacted by out of town? Where are the businesses and employers located? What's the availability and cost of car parking, both on street and off street? Is tourism important? Are there seasonal impacts on travel demand, up or down? Are there effective bus priority measures? What's the state of roadside furniture for bus passengers? Does the bus company produce printed promotional literature? Is there regular investment in new buses? Are bus frequencies optimized? Are bus fares and tickets reasonably priced, offering value for money? Are staff in the bus company motivated to deliver an excellent service? Most important of all the things I've covered tonight, where's the person based who makes decisions about bus routes and frequencies? Because I put it to you, they need to be based where the action are not always the case. Either in some of the groups, the managers, if they still have an influence, have got such a large area, they can't possibly be in touch with their local communities. Or the consultants the local authorities have brought in to manage it and make decisions have no idea what's going on. They couldn't answer a lot of these questions. Or you've got politicians making decisions for political reasons, not for bus reasons. But it's important because nothing stands still. Change is inevitable. And you've got to manage that change effectively. And the best model is a locally based, in touch, experienced transport professional able to make changes in a coordinated and organized way. Someone who is champion buses in a local area. And I'll leave you with this thought. In London, which has long been franchised, and people say it's a success, and there is no other way you could run London. That is true. It wouldn't have worked to deregulate it. But in London, they have to consult to the nth degree. And here's an example. 3 years ago, they consulted on changes they said would improve bus routes in the boroughs of Sutton and Croydon. Here we are coming up to December 2023. Those changes have still not been implemented. And I put it to you, would a franchise operator ever have introduced a high-profile, excellent, top quality Route 36 and upgrade it regularly between Leeds, Harrogate and Ripon? I suspect not. Thanks ever so much for listening. Sorry I overrun my time, Michael, but hope that's been of some interest, and I shall now stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Roger. I think that was you never do sit on the fence, and you certainly haven't there. I mean, it's fascinating to look through your list of all those smaller operators who you've listed with dynamic managements, the Delanes of this world, the Fairsavers of this world. And then you reflect on, say, what's happening in the west of England now, where so many have been squeezed out because all the contracts have really let on a higher level than they can actually achieve themselves. So they're all being squeezed
absolutely.
out. I mean, a lot was said.
There's not one small operator so far been successful in Greater Manchester, and it's not a good look for the future, frankly. And yet, that's where all the experience and the passion for running buses now is, in those small companies.
I mean, I think it's very telling that Pullams, who really looked as a success private company, they came to the conclusion themselves that they just couldn't fund taking the company forward with the new infrastructure needed and everything. It does not look good. Anyway, would you be prepared to take a few questions? I see some hands raised.
Yes, of course.
So I'll start off. John Cartledge.
You can hear me now.
Yes.
Roger,
Can hear you now, John.
Roger, fascinating presentation, extremely comprehensive and very comprehensive. Hello?
Hello, John. Thanks ever so much for that.
Two things I'd like to raise, if I may. One, both related to information. You showed us lots of pictures of buses, and as you were going through the presentation, I was studying each slide as it came up very carefully. And in almost every case, I could read what was painted on the bus. I could read the license plate, but I couldn't read the destination blind. When dot matrix first came in London, we in the Passengers Committee persuaded London Transport to stand out against it because the quality of dot matrix indicators was very, very poor, and they were invisible in sunlight, and the definition of the letters was very limited. They've improved a bit over time, but they still leave a great deal to be desired. And particularly one of your buses had so much information and promotion about the bus company on the back that the route number was more or less lost in all the surrounding noise. Now, when I see a bus, the vital thing I want to know is which route is it on and where's it going. All the secondary information about what bus company it is and so on shouldn't be allowed to drown that out. Now, London has stood out against this and still has traditional blinds because all the tests show that even now they're much more legible dot matrix. And the other side of dot matrix is, of course, as soon as you get technology that allows people to have moving messages, they start exploiting it. So you only see one destination at a time. And if when the bus comes towards you, if it isn't showing your destination at that moment, then you don't see it at all, quite apart from messages to have a nice day and happy Christmas and other things that turn up on bus destination blind. So I'd be interested in your thoughts on where technology is going with that pretty critical piece of information. The other thing I wanted to ask about was, if I may, is about roadside infrastructure. Clearly, there are some pretty gruesome examples, and you showed us several of them. There are also some very, very good examples, some in this country, but many more abroad, of what can be done if the will is there. But I'm not sure if the will on the part of the local authorities there, if the bus company is not lobbying effectively and demanding something better, because this is the point of entry to your system. It's not the door of the bus. It's first wait and find out the information where you can go and when you can go there and what the ticketing offer is and so on and so forth. Any other industry would give its teeth to have free advertising space every 200 yard roadside of every main road in the country. And the fact that bus operators neglect this so conspicuously in so many places saddens me enormously, because I think you're just doing yourselves a great disservice.
I quite agree, John, on both the points you've raised. On destination blinds, if I'd had my time again, I don't think we'd have gone as far as we did as a company, with a company called Hanover, who were Lewis-based, so they were local to us, and they were early pioneers of electronic destinations. But when I look back now, it was too primitive. I think we should have insisted that we wait until they had developed it more, because I think it is embarrassing, especially in heavy sunlight, bright sunlight, that as you can still see some operators who've got those original Bright Tech and Hanover type blinds. They're not clear at all, and I'm embarrassed now at seeing that. And I think we should have been a bit stronger in saying that that's not good enough. But I do think, as a passenger now, the latest electronic blinds are much more superior. I think the technology is moving on. They are getting much better. But I in principle, I agree with you. The problem with photographs in my presentations is, as those I expect a lot of you will know, with cameras, it's very difficult with electronic blinds sometimes to actually get an electronic blind in a photograph, and you have to sort of take lots and lots of photographs to try and get the one that clicks it right. So it doesn't always show it as the naked eye would see it. But I absolutely am with you on what you're saying. And then in terms of infrastructure, you're absolutely right with bus stops, and that's part of why I'm saying that you to be a successful bus operator, you have to have someone championing the cause locally. You've got to talk to, if it's the district council, which it often is the district council, you've got to have someone who the district council knows and they realise is a local person with credibility, banging the drum that this bus shelter needs replacing, that bus stop needs replacing. But you can't do that if you're 200 miles away in a head office somewhere. The local authorities just ignore you because they've got a lot of calls on their finances these days. But you're absolutely right. I mean, we made sure, if we did our timetable change, which we did on a specific date twice a year, from the Friday through to the Sunday, we had people out there changing every single timetable, making sure they were all up to date, all properly presented, and nice, decent, clean presentation. But it's just woeful what you see in many parts of the country. So I agree on both counts, John. Lovely to hear from you again.
Thank you. Thanks.
One thing I would say, though, John, in favour of the electronic displays is I live in Wiltshire, Chippenham, and our local operator, Fairsaver, is incredibly good at giving good destination displays on all their vehicles. It's very clear to see what routes they're on. And that would never happen if they had to have it reprinted every time. They can just reprogram it. It works for them. And it's the scale of the operation as well. And I think the same with some of the things about infrastructure. There's a lot going on in the moment in Somerset. Groups complain about the stop infrastructure. But whilst Roger says about operators lobbying the council, most of the routes in Somerset are tendered. So it's the council have just taken the hit on the revenue. They don't wish to promote their own buses.
Astonishing, isn't it?
Anyway, I've got, it's not Phil G, it's Phil I've got on here. I've got two Phils wanting to ask questions. So we'll go with Phil, please.
Hi, Phil Smith. Roger, very good presentation, very interesting. It's more of just a point, really. I had to have a smile when you showed the slide with the Greater Manchester timetable rack, because I used to run a bus company that served Greater Manchester, and we actually challenged them about the presentation of their timetables, in as much as we wanted to add our logos to them, and they hid behind the shield of being impartial and said that it was absolutely imperative that all the timetables looked the same. They were only identified by route number and service description, because they wanted to promote, you know, what they felt was as much as an integrated network as they possibly could, you know, under deregulation. But to be honest, in the early days of deregulation, they did used to allow a little bit more, you know, self-determination on their timetables. But as time wore on and they became more entrenched about the, you know, the framework under which they were required to work, they saw publicity and you know, public information as a tool in the battle of attrition to regain control of the bus services.
Interesting, Phil. It just reinforces the point that I often think that this isn't a criticism what I'm about to say about local authority people. I have the enormous respect for them. I couldn't do the work they do. I'd be totally frustrated. I'd have to leave. It's not it wouldn't suit me. But local authority people, generally speaking, are not adept and don't understand the concept and the idea of selling something, because they're producing public services that you don't have to market, you don't have to sell as such. So from their point of view, yes, everything has to look the same, and it would all be printed information, and they're giving out information. But if you want a successful bus operation, you've got to market it, you've got to sell it, you've got to promote it, especially if you want to get motorists to think, oh yeah, I will give up the car because I've heard so many good things about traveling by bus. I know the concept of it, I understand it, I'm going to give it a try. You don't just get that if you have boring looking timetables. That's just like telling everybody what their rates are, you know, a rate bill or a rate demand, or because generally speaking, local authorities don't have to upsell, they just provide service. But buses aren't like that, and this is going to be the problem going forward when combined authorities take over and become more and more influential. They'll do a darn good job, I'm sure, to begin with, but they've got to grow the market if it's going to be successful.
I think one other point I would make before I give way to the next questioner is, I think it's a shame that in tranche one of the TFGM franchising scheme, they've actually given up on the route branding on the Vantage services. I think they'll regret that move, because they've essentially destroyed a premium product overnight with yellow paint.
Yeah, absolutely.
It'll be interesting to see what happens to patronage, I think, over time.
Yeah. You see, I mean, TfL are the classic example. Everything's red. I mean, they are trying to do, with Superloop, they are trying something different now. But the reason London has been successful over these years in growing until they've now declined was because the population of London was growing, because they were restricting car use. And there are other factors that were happening in London. From my 20 points, some of those were happening in London at the time. It was nothing to do with, they weren't selling the idea of bus travel.
Thank you, Phil.
Is the Phil G, Michael?
Now.
Hello, Roger. Apologies you can't see me. I'm on the bus, and I am actually, I do work for a local authority, and I'll let you work out from the bus which one it is.
Well, it's a very successful one in the Wiltshire area,
No
I
comment.
think.
One of our problems at the moment is reliability, big time. And it's mainly due to the lack of drivers. We've come to the conclusion, and I think most of our operators have come to the conclusion, that there are no more bus drivers available, certainly not in rural areas. And the ones that are available are either bouncing around from one operator to another, either because they're going for the best rate of wages, or because they're given the push by one operator and the others are so desperate that they'll just take them on to see if they can tame them, so to speak. This is really leading to the operators taking too many risks on reliability. And certainly we have one operator who on the outside looks like a really good and professional bus company, running the most unreliable service you've ever seen. And the others are pretty much at it. You know, one driver goes off sick, that's it. That whole duty has gone, and it's that, and it won't be replaced for the rest of the day because there is nobody to replace it. Similarly, we've got similar problems all over the county with vehicle repairs, partly, I suspect, because of the not enough fitters around, but also because of parts for vehicles. And this is making what used to be a really good, reliable bus service in the county rather embarrassing, to be honest with you. Have you got any advice as to how a council could actually help solve this problem? Because we are really running out of ideas at the moment.
I regret I probably have not got the golden answer to that one. It is a problem affecting many parts of the country, but I mean, I think you've got to try and reimagine what a bus driver's role is and who you can attract as a new source of recruit. I mean, a lot of bus companies are really trying to improve their gender balance, aren't they, now, by trying to make the job more appealing to females who, for many decades, have been underrepresented in the industry. Because if you can pitch it more at the retail market, especially if you're running in a rural area, more smaller buses, community type feel to the thing, you know, retailers seem to manage to get women more than men in roles, and I think the bus industry's got to try and work harder at that, possibly. But I haven't got a magic solution. I'm really sorry, Phil. I haven't. I'm now 10 years into retirement, a bit perhaps too out of touch with some of the issues in terms of recruitment.
Yes, it's not an easy answer really to any of this, because it's not like you can take any railway porter, as seems to be the answer in Wales, and turn them into a PCV driver, which I assume you've seen the press coverage of, Roger.
No, I haven't seen that.
Oh, it's a Transport for Wales. One of their policies for sorting out special rails in a short notice is when they've got franchising, they'll be able to get some railway staff to go down to the local operator who's got franchise buses and then use it on special rails.
Right, okay. But
it's not like taking someone on in the corner shop to work or things like that. You've got to be a skilled person. You've got to be trained to do it. And most of the operators, I suspect, in Wiltshire, other than the groups, don't train up that many staff. I've got the capability of.
But I mean, it probably comes down to rate of pay as well. You may have to just review how much is being paid, because there's a lot of driving jobs out there now. Look at all the explosion in home shopping. and home deliveries. You know, the likes of Amazon and Sainsbury and Tesco. They're all in the driving market now, and I think bus operators have got to get realistic about what their comparative rates of pay are, which obviously then feeds through to costs, which feeds through to revenue, which feeds through to how much you're charging, which feeds through to are you encouraging more people to travel, which feeds through to if you're only charging maximum fare of £2, how are you going to afford decent pay for your staff?
Exactly. Are there any further questions out there for Roger? I can't see any hands up. It looks like you've kept them quiet now, Roger. So
my bedtime, so that's just worked nicely.
Well, thank you very much for giving up your time and
oh, not at all. It's been my pleasure.
Yeah. Enlightening us on your thoughts. I mean, it looks very choppy seas ahead as far as I'm concerned, or from my point of view, that the industry that we know is going to be really challenged in the next few years. And as you haven't answered some of the questions, none of us can. The next election will be interesting because everyone's going to have to state what they're going to be doing post-election.
They'll fudge it. Politicians will fudge.
Anyway, so thank you, Roger. And before
my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Can I just give a plug for a few more Zoom meetings we have? The 16th of January, Anthony Delane Smith, who's been touring the branches giving his talk, will actually be on the Zoom for those who haven't been able to see him at the branches. To the Buses Born, which will be his look back on his presidential year, plus giving some of his views on the industry. The 8th of February should be a entertaining one you might like to put in your diary, Roger. At the moment, Jason Stevens-Reed, who's the operations manager at EZEC, will be talking to us about Westlink the first year. So that could be potentially interesting. And on the 22nd of February, another one that's potentially going to be quite fascinating. It goes back to what you were also talking about earlier, about deregulation. Mark Reddy will be talking to us about the shenanigans in Bournemouth in about 1986 to 1990, when a whole raft of companies came in and started competing in the Bournemouth area. I discovered that Mark, actually, his first job was working for Badger Vectis. And he's obviously in association with that area for a while. And I was speaking to him on Tuesday, and he's sort of quite passionately going back through all his memories. So it sounds like it could be quite an interesting talk. Certainly, if we get one or two of the other people who are active in that area also in on the call. So looking back at that perspective, was it 40 odd years ago now? So there are 3 up and coming meetings. They're all in the branch bulletin. Didn't get the dates and the times. So after that advert, just again, Roger, thank you very much. And thank you everybody who's attended. We're very well. Very good attendance. Thank you. And you'll get some thumbs up down the bottom now.
Thank you. Nice to see everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.